Good morning, everyone. It's a tremendous pleasure to have you with us today for the Stanford China Economic Forum. My name is Grant Miller. I'm the director of Stanford's Center on Global Poverty and Development. I think it goes without saying that now is a very important time for holding events like ours today. The US and China play vital leadership roles in the global economy, accounting for roughly 40% of the world's GDP and setting the pace in innovation and technological advancement. Given the critical economic and political positions that they occupy, it's crucial that the two countries find mutually beneficial, positive-sum ways to work together. For this to happen, a collaborative relationship based on common understanding and shared interests is critical. Stanford's ties with China are broad and deep, stretching back to a series of visits and exchanges following the United States' opening to the People's Republic of China in the 1970s. Today, more than 1,000 undergraduate and graduate students from China are studying at Stanford, and many Stanford students and faculty travel and collaborate with others in China regularly. Our sincerest desire is that today's forum will foster deeper collaboration and exchange between Stanford and our counterparts in all spheres in China. It's also an opportunity to show off a bit, to showcase cutting-edge new research ideas and business ideas coming from both sides. Okay, so I'd like to turn to introducing three people who will be speaking with us this morning, and then I will very quickly get out of the way. The first is James Jiansheng Liang, who will say a few words on behalf of the Stanford alumni community here in China. Dr. Liang is the co-founder and executive chairman of the board of Ctrip, the largest online travel company in China. Dr. Liang co-founded Ctrip in 1999 and has served as a member of the board of directors since the inception of the company and as the chairman of the board since August 2003. He also served as chief executive officer from 2000 to 2006 and again from 2013 to 2016. Dr. Liang is not only a leading entrepreneur, but also a scholar. After a successful early career at Ctrip, he returned to school and received a PhD in economics from Stanford in 2011. Dr. Liang worked with Stanford colleagues Edward Lazier, Nicholas Bloom, and others, and has published papers in top academic journals in economics. Dr. Liang has also been a leading advocate of abolishing the one-child policy and of pronatal policies in China, a direction reflected in recent policy decisions. His book, The Demographics of Innovation, discusses how an aging population inhibits innovation and entrepreneurship. Dr. Liang is an active alumni, helping Stanford in many spheres as well. He is on the advisory board of the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, and he has served as president of the Stanford Club of Beijing since 2017. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Liang.
Thanks, Grant. President Marc, Tessier-Lavigne, faculties from Stanford University, distinguished guests, welcome to the inaugural Stanford China Economic Forum. Alumni in China have been longing for such a signature event like this, to bring Stanford and China closer together to discuss critical issues and promote more exchange and collaborations. Thanks to the faculty committee for putting this event together, particularly the GSD Dean John Levin, Marc, Duggan, and Grant Miller from CEPA, and Hongping Li, who leads the China program of the Stanford Center on Global Poverty and Development. As you enjoy the program today and reflect over the coming weeks and months on what you have learned and the connections you've forged here, I invite all alumni and distinguished guests to engage more deeply with Stanford and get to know Stanford, CEPA, the GSB, the Center for Global Poverty and Development. Well, there's recently a lot of pessimism about the outlook of the Chinese economy. So I guess I'm an unusual economist, so I would like to be unusually optimistic. So I believe the Chinese economy will do very well. Why? Well, first, the Chinese technology capability. We can discuss all day how strong is the overall Chinese technology capability. But at the per capita level, the GDP per capita in China is much lower than what would be predicted by its per capita level innovation capability, measured, for example, by R&D spending per person, patent per person, etc. In other words, China's per capita innovation capability is well ahead of countries at a similar level of income, such as Thailand, Brazil, and Malaysia, etc. So China still has a huge room for productivity improvement. Second, I predict China will continue to improve its innovation capability thanks to its huge population size. As the most populous developed country and the most populous developing country in the world, the US and China both enjoy an enormous scale advantage in user base, in talent pool, and data availability. The advantage of a large country is not as important in the pre-information age, when most innovation occurs in manufacturing, because a manufacturing company in a small country can also achieve economy of scale by exporting. But today, in ever more important high-tech service sectors like internet and AI, the websites and the algorithm need to be trained with a huge amount of real users and data. For this reason, the advantage of a large home market is decisive. A critical mass of users and data and talents can be reached earlier in a big home market and giving the innovators in a big home market a head start for commercialization. And typically, after an innovator in a large country achieves commercial success in their home market, it can move on and capture markets of smaller markets. That's the reason in the age of AI internet, the US and China companies are far more successful than companies in smaller European countries and Japan. Economists often underestimate the impact of the demographic factors on the economy, especially on innovation. That's why I wrote a book recently titled The Demographics of Innovation on this topic. And you guys are welcome to pick up a copy at the registration area. In addition to size of the population, the age structure of the population, the geographic concentration of the population are also important. For example, I've argued in this book that declining of Japanese economy in the last few decades was directly related to the aging of its workforce. If you believe the thesis of the book, the conclusion and the policy implications are obvious. And both of China and the US will do well. And from a policy perspective, it is very important for China to adopt a pro-fertility policy to maintain the size and the youth of its population. And for US, the key is to continue to attract immigration, which has been a huge plus for its innovation capability. Overall, I'm still very optimistic about the race of innovation between the two greatest nations in the world. Well, because the technology race is not a zero-sum game. Technology innovation builds on each other, and by working closely together, the US entrepreneurs and the Chinese entrepreneurs and the scholars can speed up the advancement of technology and speed up the progression of humanity. This is why we are here. We are here to promote mutual understanding, open dialogue, and close cooperation, and healthy competitions between the entrepreneurs and scholars between the two nations. And after all, you can tell from the weather today that Silicon Valley and Beijing are not so different. Lastly, I would like to wish this event a tremendous success, and everybody will have a rewarding and exciting experience here. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Liang. It now gives me tremendous pleasure to introduce to you Marc Tessier-Lavigne, President of Stanford University. President Tessier-Lavigne is a pioneering neuroscientist and leader in biotechnology as well as in higher education. He returned to Stanford after serving for 5 years as president of the Rockefeller University, a leading graduate biomedical research university. Prior to his time in New York, he spent more than 2 decades in the Bay Area. From 2001 to 2005, President Tessier-Lavigne served on the Stanford faculty as professor of biological sciences, where he held the Susan B. Ford Professorship in the School of Humanities and Sciences. While at Stanford, he was recruited to Genentech, where he served as executive vice president for research and as chief scientific officer, directing 1,400 scientists in disease research and drug discovery for cancer and other illnesses. Prior to Stanford, he served on the faculty of the University of California, San Francisco, where he was recognized for distinguished teaching and groundbreaking discoveries on brain development. President Tessier-Lavigne is the recipient of numerous awards. I won't list them all, including being elected member of the National Academies of Sciences and Medicine. He earned undergraduate degrees from McGill University and from Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar, and a PhD from University College London. He performed postdoctoral work there and also at Columbia University. Please join me in extending an extremely warm welcome to our university president, Marc Tessier-Lavigne.
Well, thank you very much, Grant, for that warm welcome, and also for your leadership of the Stanford Center on Global Poverty and Development. I want to start by extending a warm welcome to all of you for being here today and thanking you for joining us for what I believe will be a very exciting day of discussions and conversation. The Stanford China Economic Forum provides the opportunity for an open exchange of ideas between members of the Stanford community and our alumni, friends, and colleagues in China. This dialogue has never been more important. Today, the US and China are the leaders of the global economy and the world leaders in innovation. The US excels in the creation and commercialization of new technologies, and of course, we're proud that Stanford has made important contributions to that competitiveness. At the same time, over the past 4 decades, China has made the transition to a great economic power. Soaring growth has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, has raised life expectancy and quality of life, while at the same time, innovation and entrepreneurship have taken off in an extraordinary way. Given the leading positions of our countries, it's crucial that we work together if we are to create a peaceful, habitable, and prosperous future for all. And this requires us to continue nurturing a collaborative relationship based on understanding and shared interests. The dialogue and collaboration that we will foster today will help shape a future that reflects the best of what our 2 nations have to offer. For Stanford, this dialogue builds on a long history we have of engagement with China for many, many decades. The relationship really accelerated starting in the 1970s when increasing numbers of Chinese graduate students came to Stanford to complete advanced degrees. And as you heard earlier today, Stanford is home to more than 1,000 undergraduate and graduate students from China. Our international students represent 33% of our graduate student population. Of those, fully 30% of our graduate students come from China. Now, at the same time as increasing numbers of Chinese students and faculty have come to Stanford, the university's presence in China has also grown. The Stanford Center at Peking University, which opened in 2012 in an extraordinary facility in the heart of PKU, serves as the hub of Stanford's research and educational activities in China and also throughout East Asia. From their home base at the Stanford Center at PKU, Stanford faculty are collaborating with their Chinese counterparts on everything from the development of devices to diagnose and treat the poor in remote regions of China to researching cultural and user needs that will improve product design. And at the Stanford School of Medicine's Asian Liver Center, with locations in both Beijing and Palo Alto, researchers are addressing and treating the high incidence of hepatitis B and liver cancer in Asians and Asian Americans, making a real difference in the lives of people in China, in the US, and around the world. Now, I'm personally excited that in addition to our support for our scholars and researchers, Stanford is opening a study abroad center for our students at Chinese University of Hong Kong in the autumn of 2019. The center will offer diverse academic, cultural, and internship opportunities to Stanford students, both in Hong Kong and in mainland China. We also send students to study and work in China through initiatives like the Rural Education Action Program, which gives our students firsthand experience performing fieldwork and learning about the root causes of underdevelopment in rural China. This kind of exchange of students, with Chinese students coming to Stanford and Stanford students coming to China, is not only essential to the education of these students, preparing them to contribute to solving the world's great problems, it's also essential to building those bridges of mutual understanding that are going to be so vital to the future of the world in the coming years and decades. Now, the benefits of collaborating to solve problems facing our world are clear. Our countries share challenges and opportunities in education, in inequality, in climate change, in energy transition, in financial interdependence, and in geopolitics. Today's meeting will cover much of this ground, focusing on topics at the intersection of business, of higher education, and of policy. And I'm excited to hear from experts in so many of these fields. We'll hear today insights on issues related to the following questions. In education, what are the key innovations in Chinese education? Will the Chinese education system evolve like that of the US, or in ways that are quite different? And what can the US learn from China? In health, how can we accelerate the development of new medicines for poorly treated diseases, but also ensure that our populations benefit broadly from access to medical advances? In technology, how will the roles of the US and China as the world's technology leaders evolve in coming years? And in the hottest field of technology today, artificial intelligence, what are the opportunities and risks, and how can AI be deployed for the good of humanity? In energy and environment, what technological breakthroughs and what societal innovations will help us develop sustainable energy solutions and tackle climate change? In entrepreneurship, how does the Chinese model resemble the Stanford and Silicon Valley model? How is it different? And again, what can we learn from one another? In finance, how are the US and Chinese financial systems linked? What are the risks from those links? What are the vulnerabilities of our financial system? And last but not least, in the vital relations of our countries, how will the interactions between our nations evolve, especially given the current political climate, and how can we ensure that we keep growing our collaborative and cooperative interactions? By examining issues like these, we will all leave today with new ideas, new perspectives to consider, and also new connections among everyone here that I am confident will lead to further progress in the future. Above all, I know that working together, we can harness the spirit of innovation, the spirit of optimism, and the spirit of collaboration that has spurred growth and development in both the United States and in China. Combining this optimistic spirit with an openness to understanding one another and to sharing ideas across borders, I know that we can tackle the world's pressing challenges and shape a 21st century that reflects our ideals. Now, before I close, I want to thank the many people involved in today's conference. First and foremost, James Liang and Catherine Lau for their leadership in convening this forum and in supporting it and making it possible. Annabelle Yu Long, Johnny Zhang, Tina Shi, Ming Lei, and other host committee members and local organizers. Hongbin Li, the main program organizer at Stanford. The tireless staff at the Center for Global Poverty and Development, the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, and the Graduate School of Business, who have spent countless hours making this forum a reality. Jean Oy and the Stanford Center at Peking University for yesterday's event. The Stanford faculty who have made the trip to Beijing. The Stanford alumni, students, and parents who are in attendance. And the many distinguished guests from China and around Asia who have taken time out of their busy schedules to be with us here today. Let's give everyone a big round of applause. And now, without further ado, I think we're all excited to get started with the symposium. Thank you again for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Tessier-Lavigne. Thank you for your words, for joining us, and for all that you're doing. You're almost done with me, I promise. I'd finally like to introduce Professor Marc Duggan to you, who will be our host for the rest of the morning throughout the program. Professor Duggan is the Trione Director of the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research and the Wayne and Jody Cooperman Professor of Economics at Stanford University. His research focuses on the healthcare sector and also on the effects of large-scale government programs in the United States, such as Social Security and Medicare. Professor Duggan was the 2010 recipient of the Ash Econ Medal, which is awarded every 2 years by the American Society of Health Economists to the economist in the United States under age 40, he can tell us if he's still under age 40, who has made the most significant contributions to the field of health economics. He served several years ago as the senior economist for healthcare policy on the White House Council of Economic Advisors, and his research has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and many other media outlets. Professor Duggan received his bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering at MIT and his PhD in economics from Harvard University. He's a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, the vice chair of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, and serves on the editorial board of the American Economic Journal, Economic Policy. Thank you very much, Mr. Duggan.
Thanks so much, Grant, for that kind introduction. And like the folks who have spoken before me, I'm just really thrilled and delighted that we are having this event here today, and to see so many alumni, so many faculty, students, and friends with us who are here. I'll be here with you for the next few sessions, mainly to make sure that we run on time. And with that, I'm delighted to introduce the moderator of our first session of the day on education. Rick Levin, who is the Frederick William Beinecke Professor of Economics Emeritus at Yale University, served as the CEO of Coursera from 2014 to 2017, and as the president of Yale University for 20 years from 1993 to 2013. At Yale, he led numerous collaborations with China and co-founded the Yale National University of Singapore College. He served on President Obama's Council of Advisors for Science and Technology and is a director of American Express, C3 IoT, and the Hewlett Foundation. Rick, like many of the people in the room, is a Stanford alum. He earned his bachelor's degree in history at Stanford University, and a bachelor's at Oxford University, and a PhD in economics at Yale University. He holds honorary doctorates from Harvard University, Princeton University, Yale University, Oxford, and Peking universities. So many honorary degrees. That's a lot of degrees. And I could go on and on and on, but we need to get to the substance of our next session on education. So please join me in welcoming Rick Levin, our moderator of our first session.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here, participating in a Stanford event. Deep ties to this institution. My wife and I met at Stanford, and we sent 3 of our 4 children here, and 2 of them still work at the institution. I'm also excited to be involved in this conversation this morning about education in China. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart and something I've worked on and was concerned about for a number of years. And we're going to try to take a kind of sweeping tour of many of the major issues in Chinese, both higher education and elementary and secondary education in a very short time. And I have two people on this panel extremely well qualified to help us with this tour of the horizon. Cindy Mi is the CEO and founder of an extraordinary company, VIPKid, that started only 5 years ago and has grown today to an organization that educates in the English language over 500,000 Chinese young children, and with a unique model of employing North American school teachers to meet with those children one-on-one, online, 25 minutes at a time, twice a week. It's an extraordinary company, and it's experienced extremely rapid growth over these 5 years. Chen Yingyi is recently announced that he would be stepping down after a 12-year tenure as the highly successful dean of the Tsinghua School of Organization and Management. Yingyi has a background in American higher education, having been educated at Yale, Columbia, and Harvard, and having taught at Stanford and the University of California, Berkeley, before returning to China in 2006 to become the dean at Tsinghua. And he has built an incredible organization there and built a network of supporters that's enviable for any university. So really delighted to have experts in both lower and higher Chinese education, and we're going to see what we can cover in these next few minutes. Why don't we start by giving the audience some bit of overview of some of the key issues in higher education today. So, Cindy, why don't I start with you? Just what are some of the key trends that you see in elementary and secondary education in China right now?
Absolutely. So I see 3 of those trends. One is in the past 4 years, we see more babies. And James Liang argued there'll be less in the coming years. But as we have more urbanization, I think the concentration of those babies in cities made education resources, especially high quality ones, even more competitive. Secondly, interesting fact is parents are more competency-based and interest-based when it comes to elementary education particularly, and so is where the government wants this to go. And we saw quite a few policies coming out this year. Lastly, more technology innovation in classrooms, and of course, out of the classrooms in supplementary education. So those are the 3 observations.
Great. And Yingyi, what about higher education? I mean, what are some of the distinctive features and relative strengths and weaknesses in Chinese higher education today?
The first distinctive feature is the size of the higher education, the largest in the world now. The total enrollment of higher education in China last year was 38 million students. Of this 38 million, about 7% or 2.6 million are graduate students. About 360,000 or 1% doctoral students. So this is the size. Actually, the huge expansion occurred in the last 2 decades, from 1998, more exactly. So within the 2 decades, the China's higher education expanded enormously. In 1998, there was only 1 million students can be enrolled in colleges and universities through Gaokao, college entrance exam. And recent years, that increased to over 7 million. So 7-fold increase in 2 decades. Give you one example of Tsinghua University that I've been served for the last few years. Tsinghua has about 48,000 students. About 1/3, a little bit less than 1/3, 15,000 undergraduates and 33,000 graduate students. Among all the graduate students, 40% are doctoral students. So that is very unusual. Big doctoral students, PhD programs. And also in terms of the budget, increased very fast. Last year, Tsinghua's budget was about 21 billion Chinese yuan, or $3 billion US dollars, without a big medical school. In comparison, UC Berkeley, a public research university without a medical school, last year's budget was about 2.8 billion. So Stanford is twice as this big with a big medical school. So that's basically the status of the higher education. Talk about weakness and strengths and weakness, give you two facts here. One is that in the last decade or two, the university research really improved very fast by some measure. Give you one example, is in 2003 when academic ranking of world universities just published, no Chinese universities ever ranked in those days among top 200. But last year, there were several Chinese universities ranked top 100 and 200, and Tsinghua was placed at 49. So that's, by one measure, that's improvement. On the other hand, it's well recognized that there is an overall lack of talents, innovative talents in China. There's only one Nobel laureate in science from China. In comparison, Japan, before 1980, there were already 3 Nobel laureates. So at a similar development stage of China today, and with less than 1/10 of China's population. So both strengths and weaknesses.
I can't help but comment on the idea that Tsinghua has something like 15,000 PhD students. That would be more than Stanford, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined.
That's the number. So we're making the numbers.
Yeah, so if you talk about competition to be the leading innovative nation in the world, let's put it this way: China may be taking more draws than we are in that lottery. So fascinating. Cindy, it seems that parents of primary and secondary school students in China are increasingly seeking supplemental education, that what happens in the school classroom is not enough. Can you tell us sort of what's driving this phenomenon? Why is it seem to be intensifying?
Absolutely. So compared to the percentage in the US, which is 2%, family income goes to supplementary education. In China, the number is 15.
Wow.
So it's not just that 15,000 PhD students start with a kid. I interviewed a candidate yesterday, and the lady said, my kid went to elementary school this year, and I felt I am retired because the child leaves home before 7 a.m. and goes back home at 9, taking a few after-school classes after the school, and then the entire weekend, the class schedule from 8 to 8 p.m. And there are a few drivers, I think, behind this phenomenon. One is I think this year is the 40th year of open up and reform for China. So our generation, the generation parents of born in the 1975, 80s, are benefiting from the globalization and then open up. So parents learn English, and then they want their children to learn. They want them to have more competency, and then in the future they can be competing in this global world. And then secondly, I think China parents always take education, supplementary education, as an investment than a cost. So that's why we have 15% of the family income goes there. And also, lastly, the awareness of internet usage among the generation parents are very strong. So when it comes to supplementary education on internet base, they feel this is something they really want their children to have.
And you see this is going to continue to grow, you think?
Right,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. It's fascinating. So Yingyi, one of the common criticisms of Chinese education, I found both inside China and outside, is that there's perhaps too much focus on recitation, rote learning, and the pure mastery of content, as opposed to, the cultivation of independent critical thinking and creativity. Do you think this is a valid criticism? Is it less true today than it used to be? What can be done about it if it's still?
I think it's pretty much a valid criticism. But I want to make a few observations here. First is that the learning from rote memory and is universal, but China is extreme. In some way, that this way of learning is useful for certain types of jobs, but it creates a problem if you want to educate creative talents. Increasingly in China, in universities and colleges, it's well recognized this is not good for innovation. So the main motivation for a change comes from the strong desire for innovation, because there's a consensus in China that China is now at the level of middle income. To sustain the growth, innovation is the only driving force. So therefore, the desire for creativity, critical thinking, and creative thinking mostly centered around science, technology, advancement. Tell you a little bit about my own experience when I was the dean at Tsinghua. By the way, this week I just published a paper, an academic article on Tsinghua Journal of Education. The title is Educating Students in Critical Thinking and Creative Thinking.
Okay.
It actually is an academic paper. It's already in a few days had thousands of views already. It seems to be very well received. Basically, I presented the experience I had at Tsinghua School of Economics and Management, SEM, that we, in the last decade, we tried very hard to put critical thinking at the center stage of the undergraduate education and also at the graduate level of education. We have offered a course, give you one example, called Critical Thinking and Moral Reasoning, which is a course that teaches students how to think critically. They discuss hot topics, but also read classics and engage in very lively discussion. So this is one example to show that we recognize the problem and we're doing something to address the problem, but it will take a long time to do it.
What about the examination system? It's often observed that intense competitive pressure here for to prepare for the Gaokao entrance exam to college also distorts the educational system. It's in the process of reform right now. Some of the reforms have already been made. There's a number of additional reforms scheduled for 2020. Do you think this is going to work? Is it enough, or is it something even more radical necessary?
Yes, I think many people here went through Gaokao. I'm the first class after Cultural Revolution went through the Gaokao. Gaokao is a very complicated mechanism to select students. But I want to say a few things about Gaokao. First, Gaokao has its value for China, in China's context. That you take the exam, there's one number, and one number only, testing score, to determine where you go, to which university. So this is the mechanism that public accept, and it actually is the least corrupt mechanism among many other mechanisms. So that's one thing. Second, I say it has value because I give you one piece of evidence that people believe that this is the mechanism that can select some talents, is that investment banks, when they interview applicants, they look at applicants' undergraduate institutions. The reason is they believe it is the undergraduate institutions that Gaokao select that actually provide the information about the capability of the applicants. So this is just a piece of evidence to show that Gaokao has value. However, Gaokao has problems, serious problems. Obvious problem is that you only rely on one number, testing score, and one score, not two, the aggregate of all the subjects. It's not a holistic approach. In the US, the admission process rely on information from several sources. You have a high school GPA, grade point average. You have SAT or ACT. You have counselors' recommendation letters, extracurriculum activities, community services, student essays. At least you have all this information. Then you make an assessment. We know this is a better model. It's very difficult to do this in China in the current context. But it's changing. Right now, it's in the middle of the process of reform of Gaokao in the direction of more comprehensive evaluation. Let me give you a 2-minute summary of the change, because it's complicated, but it shows that is how this changed. There are 3 components, 3 parts of that. There are 2 provinces already started the pilot, Shanghai and Zhejiang. They started in 2014 for first year of high school students, senior high school students. Senior high school in China is 3 years. So by 2017, these class graduated, and then they took the new Gaokao. Okay? And that's 2017, last year. This year, the second year. Okay? Now, what has changed? The 3 things. 1, no longer 文科, 理科. No longer the division of humanities and sciences. They abolished that. So you take the exam in 3 subjects, Chinese, mathematics, foreign language, plus any 3 subjects among the traditional 6. The traditional 6 are political education, history, geography, physics, chemistry, biology. You can choose any 3 out of this 6. So there are many different combinations. So that's the one change. Second, this actually similar to SAT subject, and ACT in the US context. Second, they called subject proficiency test, 学业水平考试. That is, you use your high school subject, you take the exam in high schools for each subject, for the subject you choose, among all these 6. And then they give you grades, A, B, C, D, E, or pass or fail. So this is a little bit like GPAs in the US context. This is based on high school performance. Finally, the 3rd component is called comprehensive quality evaluation, 综合素质评价. It's a bit like the US, in the US, the counselor's recommendation letters about your overall quality. So that's basically what's going on here, and it will expand to more provinces by 2020. So I do not see the radical change, but I do see the direction is moving, and it's too early to tell the effect of this. But it's clear the direction is moving to the more holistic approach to evaluate students in admissions, but not in a very radical way.
So you could say that's an example, perhaps one among several, of ideas about education from outside China being imported into it. I mean, it's essentially moving in the direction of the American system. Cindy, are there other examples that you know of foreign ideas or practices being incorporated into elementary or secondary education in China?
Of course, I have 2 observations. One is English language learning, I think, has been a great example where a child has to have a global perspective and then learn a foreign language from the very beginning. And I think China might be one of the countries that has implemented this the best, given everyone has to pass CET 6 or 4 at graduation, otherwise you don't get a bachelor degree, and then 高考 with English is being one of the most prominent subject tests, and then this is really hopeful. But this has been for years, and the latest trend I see is the idea of STEAM education. This is amazing. Now we have this project-based learning idea, to your point, promoting more creativity and critical thinking in elementary schools. Now children are asked to learn AI and coding when they're really young in many of the provinces.
I think everybody knows STEM education. Explain what STEAM is.
Okay, so science, math,
Science,
technology,
engineering,
8 arts.
Arts
Yes,
and math.
and then math.
STEAM.
Yeah, STEAM.
So it's a humanizing of the STEM subjects.
Right,
Yeah.
yes, with art.
Yeah.
So I think more creativity are now allowed in those elementary classrooms, which I would see is a great progress. And then even for the subjects like English, now in many of the elementary schools, teachers are now asked not to give a rating to the students, but just to have them have fun playing English games as a test for the end term exams.
Fascinating. That's great. You know, Cindy, your personal story is one of the most compelling I think I've ever heard. And it's really remarkable. I think the audience might appreciate hearing a little bit about your background and how you came to found VIPKid.
Absolutely. I think, so I was one of the 7 million, the other half, that didn't get to go through 高考. So I dropped out of high school, 11th grade. The reason I did that was in my middle school, my math teacher hated me. She thought I was so stupid because I read science fiction magazines in her math classroom. And now I can empathize a lot with my teacher because I later on became an English teacher, and I know how difficult it is to help every child in a 50-student classroom, which is merely possible. And then when I later on started a brick-and-mortar training company about 18 years ago. I started teaching young kids 20 years ago. Then I thought, what about doing this online? So almost 5 years ago, after business school, oh, by the way, later on, thanks to the 自考, like self-taught exam system, I got a bachelor degree, and then I had a GMAT. So I thought, many of these things can be done online. When one has to find all the learning materials, like from everywhere, audios and cassette and everything, what about like doing it online and then allowing children to explore the world themselves when they're 4-year-old, 5-year-old? And then I think when I met with Rick a few years ago, you're the first one actually at JSV, when we had only a few hundred teachers and a few thousand students, said, you guys are the Uber, probably Lyft, of American elementary school teachers, and advocating VIPKid a lot. So today we're able to build a global classroom for over 60,000 North American elementary school teachers, and then 500,000 Chinese kids. And then the idea of our program is not just about English language education. We teach everything in English because American teachers cannot speak Mandarin, nor Japanese, nor Korean. But then the idea is global kid. So we want our children to have this 21st century skills, so they can learn to read and then read to learn and build and explore and imagine. And also I want them to have the global competency to the Tsinghua idea, where everyone's a global citizen, and then everyone working together should be building the world to a better place. So the idea of a global classroom really is not just to have students when they're 4 or 5 years old connecting to the best English teachers of the world, but also to get to know the world and to have a bigger dream. The other side of the story, though, is to allow North American teachers, when they have only an annual income of 30,000, 40,000, now can 50% increase or even double their income. And then they really love the children across the Pacific. And they all say, they're the little child of mine in China. And oftentimes they would buy a $5 local souvenir and then mail it to China, costing them $100. But because they said it to their children on the online classroom, and this is my gift, I'm gonna mail it to you, so there's no way to take it back. So
Fantastic.
a lot of touching stories
No, it's a
on
won-
the platform
it's
every
a
day.
it's a fantastic fantastic organization doing great work. I guess the question about the future of your organization, China's already has families spending a substantial fraction of discretionary income on supplemental education, and you are entering into this with a completely new model, doing online what many other very successful companies like New Oriental and Tao have been doing for quite a bit longer in a bricks and mortar sort of context. How do you see the overall market evolving, and do you think that companies, disruptive companies like yours, will end up winning the day, or will the larger companies adapt and go online and be strong competitors in that arena as well?
That's a great question. We actually would love to see more players online, not only in China, but at a global scale, so we can bring more personalized learning with all the technology that is possible online, and also bring equity to education when the cost can be significantly lower, 10 times than it is offline, as your wonderful work at Coursera has been happening for years. So I think first point is the education market, supplemental, at a global scale is gigantic. If you think about not only China, we have 500 billion RMB annual parent spending on supplementary education. India is a huge market as well. So at a global scale, 10 times of China. So, but it's brick and mortar so far, and no single player has more than 3% market cap. So meaning when everything goes online for supplementary education, we see total phenomena already, people teaching, learning piano, coding, everything online now. And of course, everyone at a global scale, online company called themselves a VIP something or a kid something, and they all say, now we're copying from China, and it's our privilege for them to do that. But then I think with online model, everything will be 40% online in the next few years. Very predictable, much higher than e-commerce, which is global scale 10%, in China 15%. So when it's a 40% online, we can totally see a 50% market share for one or two very big players. So there will be room for all, but I think there will be dominant players at a global scale, not only in China, when it comes to supplementary education. And also I think more importantly though, than market share, I think it's a possibility of personalized learning and equity of learning. So talking about data, we have over 10 PB of data every year with about 180,000 classes every day happening on a video classroom basis. So the idea of personalized education, as Todd wrote in the book, End of Average stated, it's like going to change everything when it comes to how we can really make sure children get to connect with their favorite or the most appropriate teachers, the best content, the learning path, which can allow them the most creativity and critical thinking while they learn.
How much of all this innovation that's taking place with online pedagogy, do you see that beginning to enter into the everyday, into the regular school system, so that more technology is used in the bricks and mortar, public institutions?
Yeah, absolutely. That comes to my third point. I think there's been so many people so smart in our education system in both China and the globe trying to make a change. And I think what the ed tech, education technology players can contribute to the game is to really help optimize or make the classrooms better. For example, I think last year there are 70% classrooms in China has a 10 megabyte internet connection into the classrooms. So allowing more possibilities. And one example is now we have this dual teacher classroom model where we're able to actually connect teachers live to classrooms. We had a rural education program, not-for-profit. In a year time, we are connecting 300 rural classrooms to one of North American teachers. And now the teachers are teaching a classroom of 40 kids, And children in like Yunnan, in their village, there's never been a foreigner before, and the parents are so excited, and children see, oh, you look so different from me, and then they're across the Pacific and on the screen, they're able to celebrate and learn from each other every day. And one story is one of our teacher, Emily, she then moved to Yunnan because she said, oh, now I can make a living teaching online, I can also see my little kids. And then the children felt so excited when they see the teacher live.
Yes.
They wouldn't imagine that she would be there. So I think that's one example. That
Right. It's interesting, I mean, that the actual formal educational institutions in some ways are the most reluctant to sort of share resources. And one thing we found at Coursera, where we're producing, or our university partners are producing super high quality content beamed out to the whole world, is that now companies are using this material in their training, governments are using it in workforce programs. Universities are using the courses they create themselves for the Coursera platform in their own on-campus work. And of course, Stanford's been a pioneer in using at least video directly internally, so that students taking Stanford courses can watch the video of their lectures rather than attending and that sort of thing. But the big blocker so far is very, very few universities are willing to import the content from another university and use the two-teacher system or some sort of supplemental work with somebody else's lectures. I mean, video lectures are not yet a substitute for the textbook. That is, well, there's no reason why that shouldn't happen much more in the future. I'm proud to say that Yale at least has done this in one area by having computer science, by having our freshmen take Harvard's freshman computer science course with supplemental instruction from the Yale faculty. But I think we've got to get over that sort of parochialism that doesn't actually seek out the very best educational resources for use in any context. Yeah. Interesting. Yingyi, I often think of you as sort of one of the most entrepreneurial academic leaders in China. And you came to China from Silicon Valley, from Northern California, years of experience there. Is it fair to say that you brought some of Silicon Valley with you to Tsinghua? And if so, give us some examples. Like, have you made Tsinghua more lean and nimble than your competitors? Have you ever failed fast? Or are there other illustrations of entrepreneurship that you could tell us about?
I think I'm deeply influenced by my 9-year experience on the economics faculty at Stanford in the 1990s. I arrived at Stanford in 1990, and I saw for the first hand the rise of the Silicon Valley in the decade of 1990. I'm an economist. I believe in entrepreneurship and innovation, a la economist Joseph Schumpeter. I also deeply believe in Silicon Valley, in the role that Stanford has actually played in the development of Silicon Valley. I wrote an article in Chinese in 1999 by the title "The Story of Silicon Valley." It's already 20 years old, but still circulating in China. The reason is that I had a theme in that article. The theme is Silicon Valley is not planned. So that actually is still very relevant today. So that's why that's still circulating. So I'm inspired by my experience at Stanford, at Silicon Valley, for my education reforms and works in two aspects. One is that when you do reform, you have to be entrepreneurial. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that I put a lot of emphasis in higher education at my school, the School of Economics and Management, on entrepreneurship education. There are two aspects of that. I'll give you some examples of each. In the first case, that you have to be entrepreneurial, innovative when you do education reform. One example is our EMB program. We started a joint EMB program with INSEAD, a business school based in France and Singapore. We started that program in 2007, only 11 years old. But we did that in a very innovative way. So last 5 years, this program, this joint program, all English instruction, this program was ranked by the Financial Times in number 1 or 2 or 3 positions globally. One of the reasons is that Stanford does not offer EMBA programs. So this gives us some space to do things in some areas. And students taking classes in 4 campuses: Beijing, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, and Fontainebleau. And also we made great use of our connection with the Chinese business community, of course, taking advantage of the very fast growth of the Chinese economy. The second example is, this is a very hard reform. It is the reform of the faculty appointment and promotion system. Now we are the first school in Tsinghua did that in 2010. And now we have a system very similar to the North American model of a tenure system. But when you do this, it's very difficult. We have to be very careful to grandfather some faculties, to phase in sabbatical leave system, to change the piece rate pay. Most of the Chinese university faculty are paid by piece rate. How many hours you teach, how many papers you publish, multiplied by the rate. We changed that to the annual salary system, like in the US. But salaries, again, you have to be sensitive to Chinese culture, are not decided by the dean, but by the committee. So you have to be careful. So all these you have to be, we're economy, we use a lot of experiences from economic reform. You do dual track, you do grandfathering, you do many things. So you have to be creative. Like another example about our focus on entrepreneurship education at the school. Traditionally, business school educates students for big companies, corporations, professional manager. We still do that. However, I think this is very much influenced by my experience at the Silicon Valley, is that we also need to have education in entrepreneurship, innovation, and etc. So we created a honors program back in 2009 for our undergraduate, small program for entrepreneurship. We also added a track in innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership for our second degree undergraduate program for non-School of Economics and Management students, mostly engineers, science, engineering students at Tsinghua. So for all this, we feel this is the way to do things. And we also use our advantage, the location. Tsinghua, very close to Z Park, Zhongguancun, and we are centered in Beijing. So we invited many entrepreneurs come to give their stories to our students. For example, I invited Peter Thiel from the Silicon Valley to give a course, startup companies, 0 to 1. I also invited entrepreneurs from China and in America to have a fireside chat with me. For example, people like Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Jack Ma, Pony Ma, all of them came to Tsinghua to talk to students directly. So through all these activities, we try to create a new educational environment. And for all this, I think that the Stanford and the Silicon Valley really has a huge impact on my way of thinking.
One other of your innovations was to inject some general education or liberal arts curriculum into the undergraduate business school.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that's very different than what's happening around China.
I think general education and American colleges in undergraduate education is something so important and underappreciated. The reason is I went to the US in 1981 for graduate studies. The most students, Chinese students, went to the US in those days, until recently, most of them in graduate studies, and most of them in science and technology. So my major was mathematics and changed to economics. But I stayed in the US for a long time. I taught undergraduates in the US, at Stanford, at Berkeley, at other universities. I knew that the very important part of American higher education is its undergraduate program, general education. Undergraduate program for almost all universities. Of course, US has liberal arts colleges. They are famous for general education. But for China, the system is different. It is more specialized education. But I want to say that it's been changing. And one of the advantage of China's education system, higher education system that can accommodate general education is that we have a very similar educational system of the US, probably the closest among all the universities in the world. We have 12 years of primary and secondary education. We have 4 years of colleges, undergraduates. Europeans, university, 3 years. You have 4 years, then you could have the first 1 or 2 years of general education, still leave enough time for specialized majors, etc. But if you only have 3 years of college, it's very hard to do that. And in recent years, also, we have now the system after the last 2 decades of reforms, you have the 2 years of professional masters and 5 years PhDs. So basically very much similar like the US system already. I think more than any other countries in Europe or Asia. So the general education that I spent a lot of time at Tsinghua SEM, we have the first 2 years, mostly general education. So we introduced the courses like Chinese writing. Writing is so important. Communication is so important. And Chinese civilization, Western civilization, the one course I just mentioned, the critical thinking and moral reasoning. We also have a category of natural sciences. Traditionally, you teach introduction to physics, introduction to biology or life sciences. Last semester, I added 2 history of science courses in our general education. History of physics, a brief history of physics, and a history of life sciences. Because these 2 courses will teach students not just formulas, but also the process of major discoveries. There are a lot of critical thinking and creative thinking, and also implications, social and ethical implications. So these courses are all in our general education programs.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about the future, sort of trajectory of education in China. Cindy, right now the private sector is playing a big role, and of course the burgeoning ed tech industry playing a big role in supplemental education of school-age children. Do you think that is it possible that entrepreneurial effort will now start to extend to actually founding day-long school programs so that private schools begin to take a substantial share of the market away from public Chinese schools? Is that likely to happen, or is that unlikely?
I think it would be I think it's a coexistence. It's not going to replace. And also, I think if you think about all the innovative models at the global level, Stanford Online High School is a perfect example, supplementing but making the top rank of the best high schools in the U.S. So I would say private full K-12 education will have its place because more parents really would love for their kids to have high quality education. And there are 28 80,000 new babies born in Beijing. So we would see a scarcity of all these high quality education for kindergartens or elementary schools. So there will be a demand. But I think as we start to build up those private or innovative education models, there's so much we should learn from the traditional brick and mortar K-12 system. Right. So we would, when we build up all these like future models, with all the data and technology, try to optimize first before we revolutionize and just build entirely new models. Yeah. And I think in a VIPKid case, we have now got 500,000 students. What about 5 million? What about 10 million? What about 500,000 teachers? And then we probably would have a lot of data that is so unprecedented compared to the past. And then through all the data, I think what we really ought to learn is not to start to build a new school, but I think is to figure out how can we personalize in children's learning as a 3, 4, 5-year-old child. And then this will probably lead us to better ideas on how to scaffold the content, how to build out the curriculum. Then, probably in 10 years, there will be more private education that will be fundamentally reimagined or rethought when it comes to K-12 education.
That's very interesting. One thing you said intrigued me, which is the data that you are accumulating as you expand. I mean, now 500,000 school children. At Coursera, we did about 500 controlled experiments a year on our platform with, giving different treatments to different parts of our learner population in order to advance pedagogical research, to learn what methods work better, what types of presentation material, what kinds of visual devices work best. Are you starting to do research at all on your internal research and controlled experiments with your student population?
Yes, we do. And we do work with a Stanford education school professor, Bruce McCandless. I want to acknowledge him. He's been tremendously helpful in early childhood education. And then we do a lot of not controlled experiments. We also do A/B, all the tests and all the grade scales. With 500,000 students, we now have 4 different curriculum lines. We've got the traditional ESL lines, working with Oxford University Press. We also have the more global education lines with HMH, Houghton, Mifflin Harcourt, with Journeys, which is used by 6.7 million American kids, and Collection, the high school line. And then a Khalil line, which is our major curriculum, teaching children content-based English learning. So we also have a lot of technology-based programs, a product portfolio for the kids. We have the AI Chatterbox, which allow our children to interact with a AI teacher, and then they have dialogues every day. And then we use so many technologies like facial recognition, analytics on their facial expression, and also all the data of learning outcomes every day to iterate our platform on a bi-weekly basis, actually. So there is so much excitement around how fast we can iterate our curriculum with a 400 people curriculum and designers and product engineers that are only dedicated to education products, so that we all work together to make sure we iterate as fast as possible.
Fascinating. That's great. Well, getting back to the role of the private sector in formal education, Yingyi, you just recently became the chair of the board of Westlake University, which is a private university that's partially funded by leading Chinese entrepreneurs with support from the Hangzhou government, the Zhejiang government, and the Ministry of Education. This is a science-based university that will, in Hangzhou, that seems very promising, and you're now going to be sort of overseeing a different governance structure, basically a very similar governance structure to a private U.S. university. Do you think that it's really a public-private partnership, but do you think that models like Westlake are likely to become more prevalent, and do you think will they be an agent for reform of Chinese higher education? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think the Westlake University is Xihu Daxue, is located in Hangzhou, was approved by the Ministry of Education on February 14th, the Valentine's Day, so that's easy to remember. And we had the first board meeting. We had the first board meeting in April, so I was elected as the chair of the board of trustees. It got a lot of attention. In fact, China has many private universities, but all of them are teaching institutions. So this is the first private research-oriented university. And it's small, it's only a PhD program to start with. So it's a bit like a enlarged version of Rockefeller University. Yeah. Rockefeller University has only life sciences. We have 3 fields: life sciences, physical sciences, and engineering. Only in these 3 areas. So it's bigger than Rockefeller University. And also our model, future model, will probably be Caltech. Remain small, focused, and research centered, and only a few areas mainly in science and technology. But also we have always Stanford as a model in mind, because Hangzhou is the very entrepreneurial, innovative city. So how to integrate higher education with the local community, Stanford is the model. So from Rockefeller University to Caltech to Stanford, that's something that we have in mind. So I think this is the best way to learn is to learn from the best. Although this is a private university, as you said, it's really a public-private partnership, because we receive not only support from the Ministry of Education of the central government, but also Zhejiang provincial government, strong supporter, Hangzhou municipality government, also Westlake district, because this is located in Westlake district. They provided land and many other support. So that's that's really a public and private partnership. But very important, and you say what's the really distinctive feature of the so-called private university or 民办大学 is the governance. Because we are governed by the law of private universities in China. It's different set of laws from public or national universities. The highest decision-making body is the board of trustees. So that's the the board appoint president of the university. So in our first board meeting, we appointed Shi Yigong, Professor Shi, a noted life scientist, as the founding president of the university. So the board decides, appoints the president. So this is like Stanford and other American universities. So that's a very important difference between the private and public universities in China. We are under different sets of laws. And Westlake University received recently a lot of attention for good reasons, that Chinese very much like to see more reform in higher education system, and this is the first of this kind. I think it's a pilot, and but we take longer view. I think it takes decades of effort, not centuries, to build a great university. So we will remain to be focused and small and research-centered universities. I think this will be a right strategy to do that.
Very, very exciting. I think it's a great opportunity for exploring a new model and assuming scientific leadership. It's great. I think we're nearing the end of our time. We have a couple of minutes. Are there any questions from the audience that you might want to address to one of the other of the panelists? Is there one right here? Yeah. Yes, right here.
Thank you so much for speaking today. One of my questions is that, well, we know that education is one of the great means for social mobility, and there are many benefits of the American education system, but one of the criticisms is that often what comes with a well-rounded education is that students with more means have the means to achieve kind of the well-rounded extracurriculars that the American system so values. In kind of incorporating the best of the American system into the Chinese system, how will you make sure to avoid the same pitfalls of the American system?
That's interesting. You mean biasing sort of admissions process toward people that have the family backgrounds and means to be well prepared? Is that?
In general. Yeah. Admissions, as we know, like Harvard has been under a lot of scrutiny for its admissions process, but also just what we put value on in the education in general. It certainly makes it more difficult to kind of standardize this across a country as large as the US or as China. So I'm kind of asking just in general as well.
I can probably start. So what I have in mind is, let's focus on the future and say, how can we build a global kid program that would really help children in the next generation to learn and grow, rather than focusing too much, say, what is Chinese, what is American. And in my mind, I would say, firstly, when it comes to the students, I think what we should be really thinking about is there are 1 billion families live on $3 a day on a global basis, and education is really, really a luxury. So can we combine the best of all the education systems, and then really figure out what is the future? How can children really learn with a centric on personalized learning, and then how to motivate children to have a global skill, making sure high quality education is accessible to more children. Now with technology, we see what happens in Coursera with all the great program for university students, and for children, if they had an iPad or Android pad, I think the world is right in front of them, and they can really get access to the best if we all work together to build it out for them. And secondly, I think for the teachers, now we have, say, at VIPKid Lingo Bus, a Mandarin program where we have our teachers in China teach children to learn Mandarin, and then our teachers in the US or in the UK, they have so much a big passion for global education to help children around the globe to learn. And then we had our teacher conference last month at Dallas, and the former First Lady Laura Bush was there, spent the whole afternoon. What she said to the teachers really, really touching, inspiring. She said, the reason children learn is because you love them, and you inspire them, and you empower them. And that's why she wanted to become a teacher when she was at grade 2 in elementary school. Her teacher, Charlene, showed her passion, said, you're the best student, I really, really. So our teachers got so inspired, and about the 400 attendants, half of them came to me in tears, and they said, no, VIPKid changes lives, save marriage, to save children, give us extra income. We really want to help children around the globe to learn. So what I can't really help thinking, can we in the future build a global classroom on the cloud, making sure millions of students and hundreds of thousands of teachers are connected, and then everyone thinking about how we can help each other, having each other understand everyone's background, learning with technology empowered, so that we can really inspire and empower every child for the future. So I think the benefit of building this global cloud-based classroom will be very helpful when we try to take all the best practices rather than
the very, very inspiring vision. Maybe, well, maybe not. I think we're pretty much at the end of our time. Sorry for allowing more audience participation, but I want to just conclude this by thanking our panelists, Cindy and Yingyi, for really a fascinating tour of the horizon and a really, I think, very penetrating picture of education in China. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.